I recently got to explore some bookshops while on vacation in Michigan, and the first one that I checked out was BookBug in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and the other was Kazoo Books, also in Kalamazoo. This is the book that I chose from BookBug. It's called Terrace Story by Hilary Lichter. Cover designer is Allison Bloomer. This story is set in present day, and we're following a family of three: Edward, Annie, and Rose, who live in a cramped apartment building with little space left over. When a friend visits them from out of town, they discover that their apartment holds a secret, a beautiful terrace hidden away in a closet. They discover that the terrace comes and goes along with their guest when she visits, and what initially seems like a wonderful gift may exact a dangerous price. This book was adapted from an award-winning short story, and it promises to contain themes of loss, grief at the temporariness of life, and hope for a future. As with most literary fiction, I'm not sure what I'm going to think of this one. It tends to be hit or miss for me. I got several used books from Kazoo Books, and the first two are both by author Wendell Berry, and the first is A Place on Earth, and then Jayber Crow. Laurie Anderson is the artist who did the cover art for A Place on Earth, and David Bulin is the artist who did the work seen on the cover of Jayber Crow. It is editing me, just popping in here to let you know the painter on the cover of most of Wendell Berry's books is actually Harlan Hubbard, Wendell Berry's longtime friend who also lived in Kentucky. Looking for books that feel like summer and autumn or changing seasons in general, I couldn't recommend this author more. Berry really captures both the seasons of the year and the seasons of change within people's lives. His gift is in writing about characters who grow within the rural farming communities of America and just celebrating the beauty in the ordinary. If you could translate American folk painting into a book, it would probably be something that Wendell Berry has written. A Place on Earth follows an assortment of characters in the fictional town of Port William, Kentucky, where the land is just as much a character as its inhabitants. Jayber Crow is one of them. Jayber grew up in Port William and was orphaned at the age of 10. When he set out on a journey looking for answers, he decided to attend school for ministry. As he studied, he learned that many of his deeper questions couldn't be answered in books, but he could pursue them if he continued to live and experience both life and death. In that vein, he eventually finds himself back in Port William working as not a minister, but a barber. Jayber has one of the most interesting character arcs that I've ever read, and if you find yourself musing on big questions, maybe you love Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke, I would recommend that you give this one a read. To follow up those two fictional books that feel a lot like memoirs, I have two actual memoirs, and they are both from the life of author Beverly Cleary. The first is her autobiography, A Girl from Yam Hill, and then the follow-up is My Own 2 Feet. Whether the name Beverly Cleary makes you think of an inquisitive girl named Ramona or a motorcycling mouse, you should know that Beverly was one of America's most successful authors. She published over 50 books during her lifetime. Beverly grew up in Yam Hill, Oregon during the Great Depression, and her growing up years, including embarrassing moments, pranks, struggles to read, all of those are captured in her first book. She would later move to California, where she worked as a librarian. She met and married her husband, and she began to pursue writing for the first time. I'll be honest, it's been quite some time before I've read anything by Beverly Cleary, but I'm really interested to learn more about her life, and I've heard that her autobiographies are just as wholesome and funny as her children's books, so I look forward to picking those up. Switching gears a little into one of my favorite genres, which is fantasy, we have The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. The cover design for this book is by Michael Whalen. I have to tell you, when I think about fantasy books that have really split opinions in the reviews department, the Stormlight Archive is probably toward the top of the list. My next Brando Sando adventure is probably going to be the Mistborn trilogy, but I couldn't resist this tiny chunky little copy when I saw it in the used bookstore. It's still so many pages, but it clearly has been read already, and I think that takes a lot of the fear out of picking up a brand new edition, even if it is just like this, a mass market paperback. If I don't love this one, I really didn't waste a lot of money on it, and I can move on to a different series, or perhaps if I love it, I can start collecting the series. So here's my completely uninformed synopsis based on what I've read on Goodreads. This story is set in a world that has been demolished by storms. So I'm picturing Grand Canyon-like landscape based on the cover design. The magic in this world is found in the form of shards. These are found in the form of magical weapons and armor called shard blades and shard plates. Kingdoms are at war to have the most of this magic. As far as POVs go, it looks like we're going to be following a soldier who would rather heal people, a commander who may or may not or may be going crazy, and a scholar who is carefully planning a heist. And of course, all of the basis of this plot is grounded in an ancient lore and the fall of an order of knights who seem to have known how they could handle the power of those shards. I apologize if I just ruined the setup of one of your favorite books, but if it was funny, you're welcome. I found a couple of indie YA fantasy authors on Instagram. I love their content, and I was intrigued to give their books a read, so I decided to go ahead and support their endeavors by purchasing each of their first books. This first one I'm going to talk about is called Daughter of the Sun. The author is Amanda Outler. Cover design was done by Fantastic Ink for this one. There are character illustrations inside Nemeza Rain. There's a map by Rebecca Pavo, and also chapter spot illustration by Sarah Cools. So there's a lot of artistic collaboration that went into this book. Here's what you can expect from this one. It's a dual POV story written for fans of Shadow and Bone, Horizon Zero Dawn, yes, the video game, and Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know about you, but I love those selling points. I'm already in. We're following two main characters, Solyana and Paula. They're both fiercely independent young women who are living in a world that may have mislabeled their potential. Solyana has the unwanted title of Chosen One. In a world where children are born with unique gifts, Solyana doesn't seem to have received one. But when her village is threatened by endless blizzards, a sign seems to point to Solyana as being the one who can save them all. In order to do that, she'll have to leave her valley and embark on a perilous journey that many others have failed to complete. Meanwhile, Paula is an outcast in her own family. And even when she finds some people who accept her into their community, her forbidden gift labels her as a threat. I'm not sure how exactly their stories are going to end up merging and whether they're going to be enemies or allies, but I'm definitely excited to get into this world. Next up, I have Heart of the Sea by Mariah Chavez. This cover design was done by Emily Haney, and the internal illustrations were done by Celine Reese. This one is promising pirates, high-stakes adventure, and maybe a little enemies to lovers romance. Our main character, Nerissa Elliott, would do anything for her sister, even if it means sailing across dangerous seas with sirens and sea dragons in order to rescue her. And it looks like she'll have to. When Nerissa commandeers the ship of notorious pirate Terrace Crow, Nerissa discovers that her own quest is at odds with Cyrus's objectives. Cyrus has been enslaved to the Sea Queen for half of his life. Killing Nerissa could be the means for Cyrus to claim his own freedom. Meanwhile, Nerissa has magical sea powers that she often struggles to control. After uncovering their competing objectives, the two form a tenuous alliance in order to survive the treacherous seas. But if Nerissa is to succeed in her quest, she'll need to both harness her own magical abilities and keep her growing feelings for Cyrus in check. After recently reading Daughter of the Pirate Queen by Patricia Levenseller, I'm really hoping that this story is going to have the right mix of elements that makes it one I can recommend to other readers. Okay, so speaking of sink or swim stakes, The Unsinkable Greta James by Jennifer E. Smith. The cover design is by Sani Chu. I heard about this one from Meg with Books, where she was reading books to get a 5-star review, and she ended up reading this one first, got the 5-star, and thankfully for us, she did keep reading. This one made her tear up quite a bit. When a book makes someone cry, it automatically moves it up a little on my TBR. Title character Greta James has had a pretty successful early career as a musical artist, and while her mom Helen was her biggest fan, her dad Conrad was a little bit more wary diary about how that career path would impact her life. 3 months after the sudden death of her mother, and just before the launch of her sophomore album, Greta has a nervous breakdown on stage at a show. In order to escape the professional humiliation and recover from her own personal heartbreak, Greta reluctantly accepts her dad's invitation to join him for a week-long Alaskan cruise, a trip that was planned to be the 40th wedding anniversary celebration for her parents. I've heard that this story has a lot of feelings in it, obviously, because it made Meg cry, hello, but also it's got grief, it's got closure, it's got coming home feels, so I'm looking forward to reading this one. I don't know how I'm connecting all of these books, but I feel like I'm doing a pretty decent job so far. So speaking of 40th wedding anniversaries, I also picked up a used copy of The Wife by Meg Wolitzer, and this is a novella, I believe, or a short story? I don't know, it's so tiny. Joan and Joseph have been living a lie for over 40 years. Joseph is a celebrated novelist, but his success is based on his wife's talent. He's been rising through the literary world for decades, but the true writer is actually his wife, Joan. So on a flight to an awards reception, Joan finally decides this is it. This story is apparently told in reverse, so we have that initial flight with them, and then we go back in time to see how they ended up together, the different compromises that they made in their relationship, and all of the choices that came to a tipping point over the 4 decades they've been together. The Goodreads synopsis says, Wolitzer invites intriguing questions about the nature of partnership and the precarious position of a woman's ambition in a man's world. This last book I picked up purely because of the wonderful watercolor on the cover, and I quickly found that I couldn't put it back down again. It's 100 Saturdays by Michael Frank, and the cover art is by Mayra Coleman. 99-year-old Stella Levi had never shared about her past in detail until one day writer Michael Frank came to visit her on what would be the first of many Saturdays. He had come to her Greenwich Village apartment to ask her a question about the Juderia, a Jewish neighborhood on the Greek island of Rhodes where she'd grown up. From that Saturday through the next 6 years, Stella told Michael all about her life on the island and when that life was taken over by war. In 1912, the Italians took their first steps to control, and their power was only briefly wrested away when the Germans took over in 1943. In 1944, the Germans rounded up all of the residents and took them by boat and then by train to Auschwitz. Of the dwindling number of Holocaust survivors, Stella's journey was one of the longest of any of the deportations, and 90% of her village was killed when they entered the camp. In the synopsis, this book is said to be a portrait of one of the last survivors, drawn at nearly the last possible moment, as well as an account of a tender and transformative friendship between storyteller and listener. It's a reminder of the gift we can all give simply by listening well. So those are all the books that I've hauled recently for fall. Are there any that you're interested in reading? Any that you think I should prioritize? I love getting to share my initial impressions with you in these types of videos, and then harvesting my final thoughts to share with you in my book reviews. If you'd like to support my channel, please give this video a like. If you've watched this far and you don't know what to say or do, go ahead and comment a little leaf emoji. You can do the one of your choice to represent this fall haul. Thanks for listening to me incessantly talk about books, and I can't wait to do it again with you soon in another video.